Hello, my name is Ali and I've recently released an album. This is Modular Tapes Volume 1, a collection of live synthesizer performances. And pretty much every element of this release was done at home with zero budget. The only expense was ordering the cassettes, and that is totally optional. So I thought I'd make a video going over the entire process, starting from having a track to mixing, mastering, creating the artwork, and then finally releasing the album. If that sounds good, then please stick around. Also, please do subscribe if you're new here, and yeah, let's dive in to the video. Okay, so to begin you're going to need some music, some actual finished tracks, and this is undoubtedly the most challenging aspect of releasing an album. This album here is a compilation of live performances, some of them recorded here in the studio, other out at different venues, so I already had enough material for an album, but there was still a lot of work to do regarding mixing, so I thought we might start off by taking a look at the opening track, which is called Neon Thunder, and then jumping into the DAW to see how it was mixed. So there are not too many elements in this track. We have the drums, which are all coming from the KO2, so that's one stereo track. And then there are two stereo tracks coming out of the modular. We have the bass line and then the melodic percussive line, so that's the two stereo tracks coming out of the modular. So we've only got 3 tracks in total. So let's head over to the DAW and see how it was mixed. Also, if you would like a deeper dive into this track, I'll leave a link to a video where I break down the patch in more detail. Okay, so here's the session in Ableton, and as you can see there are not many tracks in this one, but let's start with the drums. Now you'll probably notice there's some pretty intense EQing going on here, and this is just because I do not have the individual drums. I've basically just got a left and right stereo track with all of the drums, and later on in the track there is some percussion. And because I can't mix the individual parts, I must have just felt that these two sounds were a bit too much, so I'm using the EQ to bring the volume down of the rim shot and that sort of clavinet sound. I'm using the Ableton drum bus, which really does sort of beef up the drums. It adds a little bit of drive, a little bit of compression. I also have just a really basic stock compressor at the end of the chain. And the last thing I wanted to show here is the send track. I've got an EQ cutting all of the low end out, and then I've got the ozone imager, which just adds a bit of stereo width, and finally an eventide reverb. And this is just to add reverb to the high end of the drums. Because I've EQ'd all of the low end out, only the high end is being affected. So if we go to the mixer view here and take the send channel off, then you can hear that the drums are really dry. It just adds a little bit of something to the mix. Next we have the bass track. Again, very little going on here. I've boosted some of the highs at around 1k. I'm using the stock compressor. I am using, I'll bring it back a bit. I'm using this RX spectral noise, which is from Isotope, and this just takes noise out of your track. If I reduce the noise reduction. You can hear there's some kind of white noise in the background. This is a really great tool, especially if you're working with hardware instruments. Basically how it works is you take a sort of blank part of your recording where there's no actual frequencies, just the noise, and you learn it, and it sort of makes an EQ profile for it. So yeah, that's really handy. The only other thing going on here is a bit of EQing towards the end, a bit of automation. And when does this come in? This comes in right at the end here. I must have just wanted to get rid of that high end of this kind of outro section of the song. Next we have Plats, the other modular track. And I do have two EQs running here. You might ask, why do you have two EQs when you could do it with one? I don't know, for me it's just easier to, especially when the frequencies are nearby, to use one to cut out that kind of, that sound, and then I think it's just a little bit boxy, which is why I did that. I have another compressor on here, and then some automation, just taking a little dip out of the frequency towards the end. It's been a while since I've opened this session, so I can't remember exactly why I did everything that I did. And then finally we have an overdub. This VST was not in the original live performance. I must have just wanted to add a little extra layer towards the end of the track as it sort of crescendoed, so I've got this kind of nice pad sound. Really subtle, just sits in the background. It could probably come up a bit, to be honest. Probably should have came up a bit. Yeah, that's the mixing for this track. Really basic. Obviously if I was working with a more sort of studio recording with multiple tracks, then it would be a much more difficult mix process, but to me this sounds good enough. I think next I want to take a look at song choice, and then we'll get into some mastering. So one of the most time-consuming elements when putting together an album is deciding which tracks you're going to use, and also which order the tracks are going to go in. And this is even more difficult when you want to release on a physical medium such as cassette or vinyl, because you're not dealing with a linear album, you're dealing with side A and side B. I wanted to release roughly an hour's worth of material, and I had about 15 tracks in contention. And then over time, I sort of whittled it down. I decided that some weren't good enough, and I would set up an Ableton session just like this one, with all of my mixed but unmastered tracks, and I would try them out in different orders, and then just go for a long walk and listen to it and see how the flow was, if anything needed to be changed. And eventually I ended up with 9 or 10 tracks. There's actually 9 tracks here, but this one is kind of like 2-in-1 track. And I managed to get them in a specific order so that we had roughly 28 minutes per side. So for a cassette tape that would be C56, meaning that there's 56 minutes of total playtime. And at the end of side A I do have about 30 seconds of silence, which is fine, and at the end of side B I've actually got more like 2.5 minutes or so, which is totally fine as well. So yeah, I would set up a session like this, and when I was finally happy with the play order, I would get into some mastering. Okay, so I've got a track in here for mastering. Firstly, let's take the mastering chain off. And I do have a utility plug in here so we can boost it to the same level. So that's it with no mastering. And that's it with mastering, and I really would recommend checking out this video from the audio professor. I pretty much followed his advice almost exactly. He's got really good tips in this about how to set your levels just right for Spotify and iTunes, etc. But yeah, let's break this one down. We're starting with an EQ here. Just basically scooping out some of those mids. I also have a multi-band EQ here, taming the low end and the snare, I guess. It's quite subtle, but it makes it sit a bit nicer. I have another EQ here not doing anything. Then I'm using an Ableton stock preset called Make It Loud in their mastering suite. I think this is the glue compressor actually. So it just boosts the level and adds some gentle compression. I'm then using another Ableton stock preset, and this one is called A Bit Warmer, and it's in their saturation suite. And it really just adds a little bit of sort of sizzle and drive and saturation and warmth. Next we have a limiter with a ceiling of 0.15 dB. And then finally we have this free plugin called Uline Loudness Meter 2. And this just gives you some information that you might want to know when you're mastering. The main one that I focused on here is that for Spotify, you want your true peak, which is down here, to be round about -1. So I've got it to -1.3, which is absolutely fine for me. But yeah, once again, let's do a kind of A-B comparison. Hopefully you can hear that it is a bit crisper, it's a bit cleaner, it's a bit less muddy, has a bit more energy. So yeah, that is the mastering, but I would once again recommend checking out that video for a more detailed breakdown on how to do this. So your tracks are mixed and mastered. The next thing you might want to think about is artwork, and if like me you're not a graphic designer or an artist, then this can definitely be a challenging part of the process. The first thing I did was go to Pinterest to just find some inspiration. Pinterest really does have some incredible artwork on here, and one of the things I really like about it is if you do find something that you like this for example, and you click on it, then it gives you more sort of similar vibes. Now I really like this kind of thing, but it's way beyond my capability to create something like that. So I ended up going for, I was really quite inspired by old VHS covers. I mean, these just look great, they're really simple, they're so 80s. I also really like gradients, like this kind of thing here, from the pink into the orange. And I did end up using a gradient on my artwork. But before we look at that, let's take a look at the audio cassette tape, people. This is where I got my cassettes made. And there's a lot of choice here of different cassettes you can choose, different packaging options as well. And cassettes are really reasonably priced, which is why I think they're a fantastic merchandise for independent artists. And they sent out templates, which we can have a look at here. This is the front cover, and we also have the obi strip, which is the card which goes along the front for my cassette. And here's my sort of finished artwork. It's really simple, which is good because I don't really know what I'm doing with Photoshop and Illustrator, etc. And this is the inside with the track listings and a little copyright sign. And then here is the obi strip. And in the end, I think it turned out pretty good. I'm quite happy with the design. It is really basic, but I think it works. I also had to make a few different sort of backgrounds and stuff for pages like Bandcamp. I've just used the same gradient background here, and this is the same gradient background with the obi strip sort of turned around and stamped on top of the gradient. Same for websites like Gumroad. Just made a little thumbnail there, but yeah, that was the artwork. It did take a while because I'm not, as I mentioned, an artist or a graphic designer, but you can definitely do it by yourself. So your tracks are mixed and mastered, your merchandise has arrived, you're ready to release your album. I released mine on Bandcamp mainly because I have some merchandise to sell, and Bandcamp is super easy to use. The website is very intuitive. It's also worth keeping an eye out for Bandcamp Fridays, which is when Bandcamp waive any fees that they normally take from sales. And actually, a wise man once said to me that musicians really need deadlines, so it might be a good idea to look into the future and see when the next Bandcamp Fridays are and set that as a deadline for your album. I do plan on putting my music onto streaming sites like iTunes and Spotify, and I found a very good video by Make Pop Music. This video goes into a lot of detail about how to copyright and register your music so you get paid if it gets used in any commercial ways. He also talks a lot about how to get more streams, how to be featured on playlists, etc. So I'll leave a link to that down below in the description. But yeah, the main point of today's video was to demonstrate that releasing an album from home on a very minimal budget is really very achievable. And in my life, I've recorded a lot of music. I have thousands of unfinished tracks. I have probably hundreds of finished tracks, but I've never taken that final step. I've never gotten over the line and actually put it out into the world, and I do kind of regret that. And nowadays I really feel like nothing bad can happen from releasing your music. In the past I used to think it's not good enough or the mix isn't good enough, but actually I really care a lot less about that these days. So yeah, my advice would be just release your music. I plan on releasing at least an album a year from now on. I do feel quite motivated after doing this one, and if in 20 years time from now I have 20 cassettes, 20 albums, I'll be pretty happy. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please head on over to Bandcamp to check out Modular Tapes Volume 1, and as always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you again soon.